Picture this. You're 17 years old, standing in your high school counselor's office, holding 3 acceptance letters to prestigious universities. Your heart is racing with excitement because you've just achieved something that seemed impossible for a girl from Riverside whose parents worked double shifts just to keep the lights on. You rush home, bursting through the front door, ready to share the best news of your life. But instead of celebration, you're met with silence. Instead of pride, you get indifference. And instead of support for your dreams, you discover that your entire college fund has been secretly drained to pay for your sister's fairy tale wedding. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. That was my reality. My name is Emma Rodriguez, and this is the story of how my family's betrayal became the catalyst for the most extraordinary transformation of my life. I was born on a humid August morning in Riverside, California, the second daughter to Carlos and Maria Rodriguez. From the moment I took my first breath, I was destined to live in the shadow of my older sister, Isabella. Bella, as everyone called her, had arrived 3 years earlier with a head full of dark curls and what my mother always described as the most beautiful eyes you've ever seen. By the time I came along, she had already established herself as the family princess, the one who could do no wrong, the child who made my parents' faces light up just by walking into a room. Growing up on Maple Street in a modest 3-bedroom house with peeling paint and a perpetually broken air conditioner, I learned early that love in the Rodriguez household was not distributed equally. Bella got the bigger bedroom, the one with the window facing the front yard where she could watch the neighborhood kids play. I got the smaller room that faced the back alley, where the only view was Mrs. Chen's laundry line and the dumpster from the corner market. While Bella spent her afternoons in dance classes and piano lessons that stretched our family budget thin, I spent mine at our grandmother Rosa's house on Oak Avenue. Abuela Rosa lived in a tiny 2-bedroom house that smelled like fresh tortillas and jasmine tea, where every surface was covered with crocheted doilies and faded photographs of relatives I'd never met. It wasn't supposed to be my second home, but it became one out of necessity. My parents were always busy driving Bella to rehearsals, recitals, and competitions, and someone needed to watch me. Abuela Rosa never made me feel like a burden. In her kitchen, while she rolled out mesa for tomorrow's tamales, she would listen to me read aloud from library books. She was the one who first noticed that I could solve math problems faster than kids twice my age, the one who encouraged me to check out programming books from the library when I was just 10 years old. While my parents celebrated Bella's B+ report card with dinner at Applebee's, Abuela Rosa quietly celebrated my straight A's with homemade flan and stories about her own dreams of becoming a teacher before she had to drop out of school to help support her family. The disparity became more obvious as we grew older. When Bella turned 16, my parents threw her a quinceañera that cost them 3 months' worth of overtime pay. The backyard was transformed with white tents, professional lighting, and a mariachi band that played until nearly midnight. Bella wore a pink gown that cost more than my father's monthly salary, and the whole neighborhood talked about it for weeks. When I turned 16, my parents took me to Olive Garden and gave me a $50 gift card to Target. "We're saving money for your college," my mother explained with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Education is more important than parties." I believed her. I held on to that promise like a lifeline because I knew that college was my ticket out of Riverside, my chance to become something more than the forgotten second daughter. While Bella focused on her Instagram followers and dating boys with expensive cars, I buried myself in advanced placement classes and coding tutorials. I spent my evenings in the Riverside Public Library, teaching myself Python and JavaScript while other kids my age were at parties or football games. My junior year of high school, Bella announced that she was dropping out of community college to become a full-time lifestyle influencer. She had gained a modest following posting makeup tutorials and outfit photos, and she was convinced that social media fame was just around the corner. My parents worried, but they supported her decision. Bella has always been creative, my mother would tell anyone who questioned it. She'll find her way. Meanwhile, I was taking college-level mathematics courses online and volunteering as a tutor for middle school students who struggled with basic algebra. My computer science teacher, Mr. Patterson, pulled me aside one day and told me I had more natural programming ability than students he'd taught who went on to work at Google and Apple. He encouraged me to apply to UC San Diego's competitive computer science program, despite the fact that no one from Riverside High had been accepted there in over a decade. The application process consumed my senior year. While Bella spent her days at the mall and her evenings at parties, I spent mine writing essays, perfecting my portfolio, and studying for the SAT until my eyes burned. I applied to 8 universities, each with a hefty application fee that I paid for with money earned from tutoring and babysitting neighborhood kids. My parents barely noticed the stress I was under or the hours I was dedicating to securing my future. In March of my senior year, the acceptance letters started arriving. UC San Diego was the first, followed by UC Berkeley, and then Stanford. Each envelope felt like validation, proof that all my hard work and sacrifice had been worth something. But the letter that made my hands shake was the one from UC San Diego's engineering department, offering me a partial merit scholarship that would cover 60% of my tuition. I was so excited that I could barely contain myself as I walked through the front door that Tuesday afternoon. My parents were in the kitchen, my father drinking coffee after his construction shift, and my mother grading papers from her job as a school administrator. Bella was at the island, painting her nails a shade of coral that she claimed was perfect for her skin tone. "I got in," I announced, my voice cracking with emotion. "I got into UC San Diego with a scholarship." My father looked up from his newspaper with mild interest. "That's nice, mija." "Nice?" I repeated, clutching the acceptance letter. "Dad, this is UC San Diego. It's one of the top engineering schools in the country." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "And they're paying for most of it." My mother smiled absently while continuing to mark papers with her red pen. "We always knew you were smart, Emma. I'm glad all that studying paid off." Bella didn't even look up from her nails. "Can you be quiet? I'm trying to concentrate." That was it. No celebration, no phone calls to relatives, no proud Facebook posts. Just a brief acknowledgement before the conversation moved on to Bella's upcoming photo shoot with some local photographer who was going to help her build her brand. The indifference stung, but I tried to push it aside. I had gotten into my dream school with a significant scholarship. That was what mattered. I spent the next few weeks researching everything I could about UC San Diego's computer science program, planning which classes I would take, and dreaming about the internships and career opportunities that awaited me. It was during this time that Bella dropped her bombshell. She burst into the house one evening in early April, practically glowing with excitement, her left hand extended to show off a diamond ring that caught the light from every angle. "Tyler proposed!" she squealed, launching herself into my mother's arms. "We're getting married!" The house erupted in chaos. My mother screamed with joy. My father opened a bottle of champagne he'd been saving for a special occasion, and Bella called everyone in her contact list to share the news. Tyler Mitchell was the son of a successful real estate developer, a 25-year-old with a trust fund and a BMW who had been dating Bella for exactly 7 months. He was handsome in a generic way, with perfectly styled blonde hair and a smile that he used like a weapon. Within hours, my mother had already started making lists. "We need to book a venue immediately," she said, pacing around the kitchen with her phone pressed to her ear. "The good places fill up months in advance." "What about a budget?" my father asked, though he was smiling so widely that I could tell. He was just going through the motions of being practical. "We'll figure it out," my mother replied. "This is our daughter's wedding. We can't cut corners." I watched this scene unfold from the kitchen doorway, feeling like a ghost observing someone else's family. No one asked for my opinion about Tyler, though I had always found him arrogant and shallow. No one seemed to remember that just a few weeks earlier, they had been talking about saving money for my college expenses. It was as if my acceptance to UC San Diego had never happened. The wedding planning consumed our household for the next 2 months. Every conversation revolved around flowers, catering, photography, and venues. My parents threw themselves into the project with an enthusiasm I had never seen them display for anything related to my achievements. They visited 15 different reception halls before settling on the Grand Palms Resort in Palm Springs, a lavish venue with crystal chandeliers and a price tag that made my father's face go pale when he signed the contract. "It's what Bella deserves," my mother kept saying, as if repetition would make the statement true. Meanwhile, I was trying to figure out how I was going to pay for the remaining 40% of my UC San Diego tuition, plus room and board, textbooks, and living expenses. The scholarship was generous, but it still left a significant gap. Every time I tried to bring up the subject with my parents, they would brush me off with vague promises. "We'll figure something out," my father would say. "Don't worry about it right now." "Your education is important to us," my mother would add. "We're just dealing with a lot right now with the wedding." I tried to be patient. I applied for additional scholarships, worked extra tutoring hours, and even considered taking out student loans. Though the thought of graduating with debt terrified me, I assumed that once the wedding was over, my parents would turn their attention to helping me prepare for college. The wedding was scheduled for June, just 2 weeks after my high school graduation. As the date approached, the expenses seemed to multiply exponentially. The dress cost more than my father made in a month. The flowers were imported from Ecuador. The photographer was flown in from Los Angeles. Every detail was designed to create the perfect fairy tale wedding for their perfect daughter. I graduated as valedictorian of my high school class, delivering a speech about perseverance and the pursuit of dreams that received a standing ovation. My parents attended the ceremony, but they left immediately afterward to meet with the wedding caterer. There was no graduation party for me, no special dinner, no acknowledgement that I had achieved something remarkable. Bella's wedding was less than 2 weeks away, and it had consumed all of their emotional bandwidth. The night before the wedding, I was helping my mother organize the wedding favors when I finally worked up the courage to ask the question that had been haunting me for months. "Mom," I said, carefully placing sugared almonds into small ivory boxes, "have you had a chance to look into my college expenses? I need to pay my deposit soon, and I still don't know how we're covering the rest of the tuition." My mother paused in her work, her hands frozen over a ribbon-tying station. For a moment, something flickered across her face, an expression that might have been guilt or regret. Then she straightened her shoulders and continued with the favors. "We'll talk about that after the wedding," she said without looking at me. "I can't think about anything else right now." The wedding day arrived with all the pomp and circumstance my parents had envisioned. Bella looked stunning in her designer gown, walking down an aisle lined with white roses and baby's breath. Tyler waited at the altar with a smile that suggested he knew exactly how lucky he was to be marrying into a family that would do anything for their daughter's happiness. The ceremony was perfect, the reception was elegant, and the photographs would look beautiful in frames and on social media for years to come. I wore a bridesmaid dress that Bella had chosen, a shade of lavender that washed out my complexion and made me look like a background character in someone else's story. Which, I suppose, was exactly what I was. I smiled through the ceremony, danced at the reception, and gave a toast that praised my sister's beauty and happiness while carefully avoiding any mention of my own future or dreams. It was 2 days after the wedding, when the thank you notes were being written and the gifts were being organized, that my world came crashing down. I was in the kitchen, making myself a sandwich, when I overheard my parents talking in the living room. They thought I was upstairs in my room, and their raw voices carried the exhausted relief of people who had just completed an enormous undertaking. "I still can't believe we pulled it off," my father was saying. $45,000. I never thought we'd be able to give Bella a wedding like that. "It was worth every penny," my mother replied. "Did you see how happy she looked? How proud Tyler's parents were. We did the right thing." "I just hope Emma understands," my father said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Using her college fund wasn't easy, but we couldn't let Bella down. This was her day." The sandwich fell from my hands, landing on the kitchen floor with a soft thud that seemed to echo through the entire house. My college fund. The money my parents had been saving for my education since I was born. The money they had promised would secure my future. They had spent it all on Bella's wedding. I stood frozen in the kitchen, feeling like someone had reached into my chest and ripped out my heart. Everything suddenly made sense. The vague promises, the deflected conversations, the way they had avoided talking about my college expenses. They had already spent the money. They had chosen Bella's one. Perfect day over my entire future. That night, I lay in my small bedroom facing the back alley, staring at the ceiling and trying to process what I had learned. I thought about all the times I had prioritized my studies over social activities, all the weekends I had spent tutoring other kids to earn money, all the hours I had invested in building a future that my parents had just casually discarded for the sake of their favorite daughter's wedding photos. But as the hours passed and the initial shock began to wear off, something else started to take its place. A cold, hard determination that felt different from anything I had ever experienced before. They had made their choice. They had shown me exactly where I stood in their priorities. Now it was time for me to make my own choices. I got up, turned on my laptop, and began researching every scholarship, grant, and work study program available to incoming college students. If my parents wouldn't invest in my future, then I would have to do it myself. I had always been the forgotten daughter, the one who had to fight for attention and recognition. Now I would fight for my dreams with the same intensity. By the time the sun rose over Riverside, I had a plan. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't be comfortable, but it would be mine. I was going to college, with or without my parents' support. And someday, when I had built the life I wanted through my own hard work and determination, they would understand exactly what they had given up when they chose Bella's wedding over Emma's future. The girl who had always lived in her sister's shadow was about to step into the light, and she was going to shine brighter than anyone had ever imagined possible. The first week after discovering the truth about my college fund felt like walking through thick fog. Everything seemed muted and distant, as if I were watching my life happen to someone else. I went through the motions of summer vacation, helping clean up the remnants of Bella's wedding celebration, while my parents basked in the afterglow of what they considered their greatest achievement as parents. My sister had moved in with Tyler, temporarily while they looked for their own place, and the house felt strangely empty without her constant chatter about photo shoots and brand partnerships. But even in her absence, she remained the center of every conversation. My mother would call her 3 times a day to check on her adjustment to married life, and my father would beam whenever Tyler's parents mentioned how beautiful the wedding had been. Meanwhile, I existed in a parallel universe where my college acceptance letters sat on my desk like expired lottery tickets. UC San Diego had sent follow-up materials about orientation, housing assignments, and course registration deadlines. Each piece of mail felt like a reminder of everything I was about to lose because my parents had made their choice without even consulting me. I didn't confront them immediately. Part of me hoped that they would bring up the subject themselves, that they would sit me down and explain how they planned to help me, despite their financial sacrifice for Bella's wedding. I waited for them to acknowledge that my future mattered. 2, that my dreams deserved some consideration in the family budget discussions. The silence stretched on for days. My mother went back to her summer schedule of organizing her classroom for the upcoming school year, and my father returned to his construction projects with the satisfied air of a man who had successfully completed a major life milestone. Neither of them seemed troubled by the fact that their other daughter's future hung in the balance. It was Abuela Rosa who finally forced the conversation. I had been spending more time at her house on Oak Avenue, helping her tend to her small garden and teaching her how to use the tablet that Bella had given her for Christmas, but never bothered to set up properly. Rosa had a way of knowing when something was wrong without being told, and she could sense the weight I was carrying even when I tried to hide it. We were sitting on her back porch one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink when she reached over and took my hand in her weathered fingers. "Mija," she said softly, "you've been carrying sadness like a stone in your pocket. What's troubling you?" I hadn't planned to tell her. I had been trying to protect her from the family drama, knowing that she would worry and that there was nothing she could do to change the situation. But something about the gentle concern in her voice broke down my defenses, and the whole story came pouring out. I told her about the college fund, about my parents' priorities, about feeling invisible in my own family. Abuela Rosa listened without interrupting, her dark eyes growing more troubled with each detail I shared. When I finished, she was quiet, for a long moment, staring out at her tomato plants as if they held the answers to life's complicated questions. "Your parents love you," she finally said, though her voice lacked its usual conviction. "But sometimes love gets confused with other things. Sometimes people think providing for one child's happiness means they've provided for all their children's happiness." "But they promised," I whispered, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. "They told me they were saving for my education. They made me believe that my future mattered to them." Rosa squeezed my hand tighter. "Your future does matter, Emma. Maybe not to them in the way you needed, but it matters to you, and that's what counts. You're stronger than you know, smarter than anyone in that house gives you credit for. You don't need their permission to succeed." Her words planted a seed of rebellion that had been waiting to sprout. I had spent my entire life being the good daughter, the one who didn't cause problems or demand attention. I had accepted my role as the forgotten child because I believed that patience and hard work would eventually be rewarded. But my parents had shown me that no amount of achievement would ever make me their priority. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. I made breakfast for myself, something I had been doing since I was 12 while my parents rushed around getting Bella ready for whatever activity demanded their attention that day. But this time, instead of eating in silence, I waited for them to join me in the kitchen. My father was the first to appear, already dressed in his work clothes and checking his phone for messages from his construction crew. My mother followed. A few minutes later, her hair still in curlers and her face creased with the satisfied exhaustion of someone who had pulled off a social triumph. "Good morning, Emma," my mother said absently, pouring herself coffee from the pot I had made. "Are you planning to help me organize the wedding photos today? I want to put together an album for Bella and Tyler." I took a deep breath and set down my fork. "Actually, I need to talk to both of you about something important." My father glanced up from his phone with mild interest. "What's that, Mija?" "I need to know how you're planning to help me pay for college," I said, keeping my voice steady and direct. "I've been waiting for us to have this conversation, but orientation is in 6 weeks, and I need to make arrangements." The kitchen fell silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of Mrs. Chen starting her car in the driveway next door. My parents exchanged a glance that lasted just a fraction of a second too long, the kind of look that passes between people who have been avoiding an uncomfortable truth. "Well," my mother began slowly, stirring her coffee with unnecessary concentration, "the wedding expenses were higher than we anticipated. We're going to need some time to rebuild our savings." "How much time?" I asked. "It's hard to say," my father replied, his voice taking on the tone he used when he was trying to avoid giving a direct answer. Maybe you could defer for a year, work, and save some money. UC San Diego will probably let you start next fall instead. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. You want me to give up my spot at UC San Diego and wait an entire year while you recover from spending my college fund on Bella's wedding? We didn't spend your college fund, my mother said quickly, though her eyes didn't meet mine. We made an investment in your sister's future. A good marriage is just as important as a college degree. More important, apparently, I replied, surprised by the sharpness in my own voice. My father set down his coffee cup with a sharp clink against the saucer. Don't take that tone with us, Emma. We did what we thought was best for the family. Bella needed our support at an important time in her life. And I don't? The words came out louder than I had intended, years of suppressed frustration finally finding their voice. I've worked harder than anyone in this family for the past 4 years. I graduated as valedictorian. I got into one of the best engineering programs in the country with a partial scholarship. But none of that matters because you decided that one perfect day for Bella was worth more than 4 years of education for me. That's not fair, my mother protested, though her voice lacked conviction. We've always supported your education. We've never discouraged you from studying. Supporting my education would have meant keeping the promise you made when I was born, I said, standing up from the table. Supporting my education would have meant celebrating my acceptance to UC San Diego instead of treating it like a minor inconvenience. Supporting my education would have meant having this conversation before you spent $45,000 on flowers and photographers. My father's face was turning red, the way it did when he felt his authority being challenged. Watch your attitude, young lady. We're still your parents, and we deserve respect. Respect is earned, I replied, my voice growing steadier with each word. And parents earn respect by keeping their promises to their children, not by playing favorites and then asking the forgotten child to understand why her dreams didn't matter as much as her sister's party. I left the kitchen before they could respond, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. I had never spoken to my parents that way before, had never voiced the resentment that had been building inside me for years. But the confrontation had clarified something important. I was completely on my own. Over the next few days, a strange calm settled over our house. My parents avoided me, and I avoided them. Bella called to complain about the apartment search, oblivious to the family drama that had erupted in her absence. She mentioned casually that she and Tyler were thinking about having a baby soon, that married life was so much better than she had expected, and that she was grateful to have parents who had given her such a beautiful start to her new life. I listened to her chatter about honeymoon plans and furniture shopping while doing research on my laptop about student loans, work-study programs, and scholarship opportunities I had previously overlooked. Each phone call with Bella reinforced my determination to succeed without my parents' help. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Patricia Williams, the head of UC San Diego's computer science department, called me directly on a Thursday afternoon in July. I had never spoken to her before, but she had apparently been following my application and scholarship award. Miss Rodriguez, she said in a crisp, professional voice, I'm calling because we've had a last-minute opening in our paid research assistant program for incoming freshmen. It's unusual to offer this opportunity to someone who hasn't started classes yet, but your application materials were exceptional, and Professor Martinez from Riverside Community College gave you a remarkable recommendation. I gripped the phone tighter, hardly daring to believe what I was hearing. What would the position involve? You would be working with graduate students on artificial intelligence projects, primarily data analysis and algorithm testing. The position pays $15 an hour for up to 20 hours per week, and it would continue through the academic year if your performance meets our standards. I did quick math in my head. 20 hours a week at $15 an hour would give me $1,200 a month, enough to cover my meal plan and textbooks with some left over for other expenses. It wasn't a complete solution, but it was a significant step toward independence. "I'm very interested," I told Dr. Williams. "When would I need to start?" "We'd want you to begin 2 weeks before orientation, which means you'd need to be in San Diego by August 15th. Is that feasible for you?" I looked around my small bedroom, at the acceptance letters still pinned to my bulletin board, and the suitcases I had optimistically purchased months earlier. "Yes," I said without hesitation. "That's completely feasible." After I hung up, I sat in my room for several minutes, processing what had just happened. A door had opened just when I needed it most, an opportunity that would allow me to start building my future on my own terms. But it also meant making a decision that would fundamentally change my relationship with my family. I called Abuela Rosa first, needing to share the news with someone who would understand its significance. Her voice filled with joy when I told her about the research position, and she immediately began making plans to help me prepare for the move. "I have some money saved," she said. "Not much, but enough to help you get started. Your grandfather left me a small life insurance policy, and I've been looking for the right way to use it." "Abuela, I can't take your money," I protested. "You're not taking it," she replied firmly. "I'm investing it in your future, the same way your parents should have done. The same way I would have invested in my own education if I had been given the chance." That evening, I made a list of everything I would need to arrange before leaving for college. I would have to take out student loans to cover the remaining tuition and housing costs, but the research position would help me avoid borrowing as much as I had initially feared. I would have to find a way to transport my belongings to San Diego without my parents' car. I would have to figure out how to establish myself as an independent student for financial aid purposes. Each item on the list represented a step away from my family and toward a future I would create entirely on my own. It was terrifying and liberating at the same time. I waited until the weekend to tell my parents about my decision. They were in the living room, looking through wedding photos and discussing which ones to frame, when I announced that I would be leaving for college in 3 weeks. "What do you mean leaving?" my mother asked, looking up from a picture of Bella cutting the wedding cake. "I got a research position at UC San Diego that starts before orientation," I explained. "I'll be working to help pay for my expenses, and I've arranged for student loans to cover the rest." My father frowned. "You're taking out loans? Emma, that's not necessary. We told you we'd figure something out." "When?" I asked. "When exactly?" "Were you planning to figure it out? After I missed the fall semester? After I lost my scholarship? After I gave up on my dreams the same way you gave up on your promise to me?" "We never gave up on you," my mother said, though her voice wavered with uncertainty. "You gave up on me the moment you decided that Bella's wedding was more important than my education," I replied. "But that's okay, because I'm not giving up. On myself." My father stood up, his jaw tight with frustration. "You're 18 years old, Emma. You don't know how the world works. You can't just run off to college without family support and expect to succeed." "Watch me," I said simply. The argument that followed was unlike anything our family had ever experienced. My parents accused me of being ungrateful and disrespectful. They claimed that I was being dramatic and that they had always planned to help me with college expenses. They suggested that I was jealous of Bella and that I was using my education as a weapon to hurt them. I listened to their protests with a calmness that surprised me. Their words couldn't touch me anymore because I had already accepted the truth about my place in their priorities. I wasn't angry, just resolved. I had spent my entire childhood waiting for them to see me, to value me, to keep their promises to me. Now I was done waiting. 3 weeks later, Abuela Rosa drove me to the Greyhound station in her old Honda Civic, the back seat packed with everything I owned that would fit in 2 suitcases and a backpack. My parents had barely spoken to me since our confrontation, treating my departure as a rebellious phase that I would eventually outgrow when I realized how difficult independence could be. Bella had called the night before, confused by the family tension and unable to understand why I was being so dramatic about college. She offered to ask Tyler's parents if they knew anyone who could help me find a job in Riverside, missing the point entirely. I thanked her for the offer and assured her that I had everything under control. As the bus pulled away from Riverside, I watched my hometown shrink in the window until it disappeared entirely. I was leaving behind everything familiar, everyone I had ever known, and every safety net I had ever relied upon. But for the first time in my life, I felt like I was moving towards something instead of away from it. The girl who had always been overlooked was about to discover just how bright she could shine when she stopped waiting for someone else to notice her light. The first thing that struck me about UC San Diego was the smell of possibility. It wasn't just the ocean breeze that carried hints of salt and seaweed, or the eucalyptus trees that lined the pathways between modern concrete buildings. It was something intangible, an energy that hummed through the campus like electricity through circuits. Walking across the quad with my overstuffed backpack and two-wheeled suitcases, I felt like I was stepping into a different universe where intelligence was valued, where hard work was rewarded, and where being the smartest person in the room was an asset rather than a social liability. My dormitory was a stark, concrete tower that housed nearly 400 students, most of whom seemed to move through the hallways with the confident ease of people who had never questioned whether they belonged in higher education. My roommate was a girl named Jessica from Newport Beach whose parents had attended UC San Diego in the 80s and who spoke casually about family vacations to Europe and skiing trips to Aspen. She was kind enough, but it became clear within the first few conversations that we inhabited completely different worlds. While Jessica unpacked designer clothes and expensive electronics with the help of both her parents and her older brother, I quietly arranged my few belongings in the small space allocated to me. I had brought my laptop, a few changes of clothes, the programming textbooks I had collected over the years, and a framed photograph of Abuela Rosa in her garden. Everything I owned fit easily into half of one closet and two desk drawers. The research position that Dr. Williams had offered me began immediately, even before orientation week started. The Artificial Intelligence Research Lab was housed in the basement of the Computer Science Building, a maze of interconnected rooms filled with humming servers, multiple monitor setups, and graduate students who seemed to survive on coffee and intellectual curiosity. My supervisor was a doctoral candidate named Marcus Chen, a soft-spoken young man from Seattle who had been working on machine learning algorithms for medical diagnosis. Marcus took one look at my background in programming and mathematics and immediately assigned me to a project that most undergraduate students wouldn't encounter until their junior year. I was tasked with analyzing large data sets of medical imaging, identifying patterns that could help algorithms detect early stages of certain cancers. The work was challenging in a way that made my brain feel fully engaged for the first time in my academic career. Within my first week, I was putting in 12-hour days between my research responsibilities and my coursework. While other freshmen were attending welcome parties and joining social clubs, I was learning to navigate Linux systems and debugging Python scripts that processed thousands of medical images. The work was exhausting, but it was also exhilarating. Every small breakthrough felt like a victory. Every problem I solved felt like proof that I belonged in this environment. My professors quickly took notice of my dedication and capability. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, who taught my introductory computer science course, pulled me aside after class one day to ask about my background and goals. When I mentioned my research work, her eyebrows raised with genuine interest. Most freshmen don't have the mathematical foundation to contribute meaningfully to AI research, she said. How did you develop these skills so early? I told her about my years of self-directed learning, the online courses I had completed, the programming projects I had undertaken out of pure curiosity. She listened with the kind of attention I had rarely received from adults, nodding thoughtfully and asking follow-up questions that demonstrated she understood the significance of what I was describing. "Have you considered applying for advanced standing in some of your courses?" she asked. "With your background, you might be able to skip some of the introductory requirements and move directly into more challenging material." The idea had never occurred to me. At Riverside High, I had been so far ahead of my classmates in mathematics and science that my teachers had run out of appropriate coursework to offer me. But I had assumed that college would level the playing field, that I would finally be surrounded by peers who shared my academic abilities and interests. Dr. Mitchell helped me navigate the process of testing out of several introductory courses, which allowed me to enroll in upper-level mathematics and computer science classes typically reserved for sophomores and juniors. The coursework was demanding, but it was exactly the kind of intellectual challenge I had been craving. For the first time in my life, I was learning material that pushed me to my limits and beyond. My success in the classroom was matched by recognition in the research lab. Marcus began assigning me increasingly complex tasks, and I found myself working directly with graduate students and postdoctoral researchers who treated me as a colleague rather than an undergraduate assistant. My contributions to the medical imaging project were significant enough that Marcus suggested I might be included as a co-author on the research paper he was preparing for publication. "That's unusual for an undergraduate, especially a freshman," he explained during one of our weekly meetings. "But your work on the pattern recognition algorithms has been essential to our progress. You've earned it." The possibility of having my name on a published research paper before the end of my freshman year felt surreal. I thought about my high school guidance counselor, who had warned me that UC San Diego might be too challenging for someone from my academic background. I thought about my parents, who had assumed I would struggle without their financial support, and return home with renewed appreciation for their priorities. As the semester progressed, I established a routine that maximized every hour of my day. I woke at 5:30 each morning to review coursework before the research lab opened. I spent my afternoons analyzing data and running algorithms, taking breaks only to attend my advanced mathematics and computer science lectures. I studied in the library until it closed, then returned to my dorm room to complete assignments and prepare for the next day. My social life was virtually non-existent, but I didn't feel like I was missing anything important. Jessica would invite me to join her and her friends for meals or social events, but I was usually too busy or too tired to participate. I made friends with other students in my advanced courses, particularly those who shared my passion for artificial intelligence and machine learning, but our relationships were built around shared academic interests rather than traditional college social activities. The financial pressure was constant but manageable. My research position provided enough income to cover my meal plan and textbooks, and I had learned to live frugally in ways that my more privileged classmates couldn't imagine. While Jessica ordered takeout several times a week and shopped for clothes online during study breaks, I ate every meal in the dining hall and wore the same rotation of outfits I had brought from home. I applied for every scholarship and grant opportunity I could find, spending hours crafting applications and essays that highlighted my academic achievements and research contributions. Some applications were successful, others were not, but each small award helped reduce the amount I needed to borrow for future semesters. My relationship with my family during this period was virtually non-existent. I called Abuela Rosa once, a week to update her on my progress, and to thank her for the care packages she occasionally sent filled with homemade cookies and encouraging notes. She was the only family member who seemed genuinely interested in my academic success, asking detailed questions about my research and celebrating each small victory as if it were a major triumph. My parents called sporadically, usually when Bella had prompted them to check on me. These conversations were awkward and superficial, filled with generic questions about my classes and my health, but avoiding any discussion of the circumstances that had led to my departure from home. They seemed to expect me to admit that independence was more difficult than I had anticipated, that I needed their help and guidance to navigate the challenges of college life. Instead, I shared only positive updates about my grades and my research work, keeping my struggles and uncertainties to myself. I never mentioned the nights when I fell asleep at my desk, exhausted from balancing coursework and employment. I never talked about the constant financial calculations, the careful budgeting required to make every dollar stretch as far as possible. I never admitted that I sometimes felt overwhelmed by the pace of learning and the pressure to prove myself worthy of the opportunities I had been given. My breakthrough moment came in late October, during my second month of working on the medical imaging project. I had been struggling with a particularly complex algorithm that was supposed to identify subtle patterns in brain scans that could indicate early stages of Alzheimer's disease. The existing code was producing too many false positives, flagging healthy brains as potentially diseased and creating results that would be useless in clinical settings. I had been working on the problem for 2 weeks, staying late in the lab each night to test different approaches and variables. Marcus and the other graduate students had offered suggestions, but nothing seemed to improve the algorithm's accuracy significantly. I was beginning to worry that the project might be beyond my capabilities, that I had been given responsibilities that exceeded my skill level. Then, on a Thursday evening when the lab was nearly empty, I had an insight about the mathematical relationships underlying the pattern recognition process. Instead of trying to modify the existing algorithm, I realized that I could approach the problem from a completely different angle, using a combination of techniques that hadn't been tried together before. I worked through the night, coding and testing and refining my approach. By morning, I had developed a modified algorithm that reduced false positives by 60% while maintaining the same level of accuracy for genuine positive cases. The improvement was dramatic enough that Marcus asked me to present my solution to the entire research team. Standing in front of a room full of graduate students and postdoctoral researchers, explaining the mathematical principles behind my algorithmic improvements, I felt a confidence I had never experienced before. These were some of the brightest people I had ever met, and they were listening to me with genuine respect and interest. When I finished my presentation, the questions they asked were thoughtful and challenging, treating me as an intellectual peer rather than a novice undergraduate. Dr. Williams, who had attended the presentation, approached me afterward with a proposal that would change the trajectory of my entire college experience. "Emma," she said, "I've been following your work with Marcus, and I'm impressed by your contributions to the medical imaging project. I'd like to offer you a more advanced research position for the spring semester, working directly with me on a project funded by the National Science Foundation. The position would pay more than my current role and would give me access to cutting-edge research in artificial intelligence applications for autonomous systems. More importantly, it would provide the kind of research experience that could lead to graduate school opportunities and potentially to a career in academic research." "The work would be challenging," Dr. Williams warned. "You'd be collaborating with graduate students and professional researchers, and the expectations would be correspondingly high. But based on what I've seen of your capabilities, I think you're ready for that level of responsibility." I accepted the offer immediately, knowing that it represented validation of everything I had been working towards since arriving at UC San Diego. But the real significance of the opportunity didn't fully hit me until I was walking back to my dorm that evening, my mind buzzing with excitement about the projects I would be joining and the skills I would be developing. I had not only survived my first semester of college without my parents' support, I had thrived in ways that exceeded my own expectations. I was contributing to meaningful research, earning recognition from respected professors, and building a foundation for a career that could take me anywhere I wanted to go. That night, I called Abuela Rosa to share the news about my promotion. Her joy was infectious, and she insisted on calling several relatives to brag about her granddaughter, who was doing important research at a prestigious university. Her pride meant more to me than any recognition I had received from my professors or peers. I also sent a brief email to my parents, updating them on my academic progress and mentioning the research position. The response came from my mother. 3 days later, a short message congratulating me on my good grades and reminding me that Bella and Tyler had found an apartment and were settling into married life nicely. The casual dismissal of my achievements stung less than it might have months earlier. I had learned to find validation from my own accomplishments and from people who understood their significance. My parents' inability to recognize my success was their loss, not mine. As my first semester drew to a close, I reflected on how much had changed since that August day when I had arrived on campus with everything I owned packed into 2 suitcases. I had discovered capabilities I hadn't known I possessed, developed relationships with mentors who saw my potential, and proven to myself that I could succeed without the safety net I had always assumed I would need. The girl who had been overlooked and undervalued in Riverside had become a young woman who was making her mark in one of the most competitive academic environments in the country. But more than that, I had learned to value myself independent of anyone else's recognition or approval. When I returned to my dorm room after my last final exam, I found an envelope that had been slipped under my door. Inside was a handwritten note from Dr. Williams, congratulating me on my exceptional performance during my first semester and expressing her excitement about our upcoming collaboration. You have demonstrated not only intellectual capability, but also the kind of persistence and creativity that mark the most successful researchers, she had written. I look forward to seeing what you accomplish in the years ahead. I sat on my narrow dorm room bed, holding the note and looking out the window at the campus that had become my new home. In 4 months, I had transformed from a girl whose dreams had been dismissed by her own family into a young woman whose potential was being recognized by some of the most accomplished minds in her field. The future stretched ahead of me, full of possibilities that I would create through my own efforts and determination. I had learned to bet on myself, and so far, it was paying off in ways I had never imagined possible. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning in March of my junior year, while I was reviewing code for a presentation I was scheduled to give at the International Conference on Machine Learning in Montreal. I almost didn't answer when I saw my mother's number flashing on my screen, since our conversations had dwindled to brief holiday exchanges and occasional updates about family health issues that never seemed to require more than polite concern. "Emma, honey." My mother's voice sounded strained in a way I hadn't heard since the days when my father was between construction jobs. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." I glanced at my laptop screen, where lines of Python code represented months of work on neural network optimization that could revolutionize how artificial intelligence systems processed visual data. The presentation I was preparing could potentially attract the attention of major technology companies and establish my reputation in the field before I even graduated from college. "What's going on, Mom?" I asked, minimizing my code editor and giving her my attention despite the tight deadline I was facing. "Well, we've been having some difficulties lately," she began, her voice taking on the careful tone she had always used when approaching topics she found uncomfortable. "Your father's company lost a major contract, and they had to lay off several workers. He's been out of work for 3 months now." I set down my coffee cup and leaned back in my desk chair, processing this information. My father had worked for the same construction company for nearly 15 years, steadily climbing from entry-level laborer to project supervisor. The idea of him being unemployed was genuinely surprising, given his reputation for reliability and his extensive experience in commercial construction. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said carefully. "Has he been looking for other opportunities?" "Oh yes, he's applied everywhere," my mother replied quickly. "But you know how the construction industry is these days. All the younger workers are willing to accept lower wages, and companies are cutting costs wherever they can. It's been very stressful for all of us." There was a pause in the conversation, filled with the kind of expectant silence that I had learned to recognize as a prelude to a request. I waited, curious to see how my mother would approach whatever favor she was preparing to ask. "The thing is," she continued, "we've fallen behind on the mortgage payments. And the car payment. And there are some medical bills from when your father hurt his back on his last job. We're really struggling, Emma." "That sounds like a difficult situation," I acknowledged, still not sure where this conversation was heading, but beginning to suspect its ultimate destination. "We were wondering," my mother said, her voice becoming smaller and more hesitant, "if you might be able to help us out, just temporarily, until your father finds another position. We know you're doing well in college, and we thought maybe you could spare a little bit to help your family through this rough patch." I stared at my reflection in the darkened window of my apartment, a modest one-bedroom place near campus that I had been able to afford thanks to the increasingly prestigious research positions I had secured throughout my college career. The girl looking back at me bore little resemblance to the forgotten daughter who had left Riverside 3 years earlier with everything she owned packed into 2 suitcases. "How much money are we talking about?" I asked. "Well, to get current on everything, we'd need about $8,000, my mother admitted. "I know it sounds like a lot, but we're desperate, Emma. We don't know where else to turn." $8,000. The amount was significant, but not impossible for me to manage, given the income I was earning from my research work and the consulting projects I had begun taking on with local technology companies. But the request felt surreal, coming from the same woman who had dismissed my college acceptance as a minor achievement and who had spent my entire college fund on my sister's wedding without a moment's hesitation. "What about Bella and Tyler?" I asked. "Are they able to help at all?" My mother's sigh was audible through the phone. "Bella and Tyler are having their own financial difficulties. Tyler's real estate business hasn't been going well, and Bella's influence work isn't bringing in as much money as they had hoped. They're actually living with us right now, trying to get back on their feet." This information was even more surprising than news of my father's unemployment. The last I had heard, Bella and Tyler were living in a luxury apartment complex in Palm Springs and posting Instagram photos of expensive dinners and weekend trips to Las Vegas. The idea that they had moved back in with my parents suggested that their financial problems were more serious than anyone had previously admitted. "So let me understand this correctly," I said slowly. "You and Dad are behind on your mortgage and other bills. Bella and Tyler are living with you because they can't afford their own place, and you're asking me to provide $8,000 to help solve these problems." "We're family, Emma," my mother replied, her voice taking on the slightly defensive tone that had always emerged when she felt her decisions were being questioned. Family helps each other during difficult times. The irony of this statement was so profound that I almost laughed out loud. The same woman who had prioritized one daughter's wedding over the other daughter's education was now invoking family loyalty as justification for financial assistance. The same parents who had assumed I would fail without their support were now asking for my help to solve problems I had never been consulted about. "I need some time to think about this," I told my mother. "This is a significant amount of money, and I need to consider how it would affect my own financial situation." "Of course, honey," my mother said, her voice brightening with what sounded like relief. "Take all the time you need. We're just so grateful that you're in a position to help us. We always knew you'd be successful." After I hung up, I sat in my apartment for a long time, staring at the research papers and technical journals scattered across my desk. The contrast between my current life and my family's situation was striking in ways that went far beyond financial circumstances. While I had been building a career based on innovation and intellectual achievement, they had been making the same kinds of short-sighted decisions that had led to my college fund being diverted to Bella's wedding. Over the next few days, I found myself distracted from my usual intense focus on research and coursework. The request for money had stirred up emotions and memories I had worked hard to process and move beyond. I thought about the teenager who had discovered her college fund had been spent without her knowledge or consent, and I wondered what she would think about being asked to bail out the same people who had betrayed her trust. I also found myself curious about the specific circumstances that had led to my family's financial crisis. My father's unemployment was genuinely unfortunate, but the extent of their financial difficulties suggested problems that went beyond a temporary loss of income. I suspected that the same lack of planning and prioritization that had characterized my parents' approach to my education had also affected their approach to saving money and managing expenses. My suspicions were confirmed when I called Abuela Rosa to get her perspective on the family situation. She had remained my most trusted confidant throughout college, celebrating my achievements and offering wisdom when I faced difficult decisions. Her voice carried a mixture of concern and frustration when I told her about my mother's request for money. "They've been living beyond their means for years," she said bluntly. "Even before your father lost his job, they were struggling to keep up with their expenses. The wedding cost more than they could afford, and they've been trying to maintain the same lifestyle even though their income couldn't support it." "What about Bella and Tyler?" I asked. "What happened to their situation?" Rosa's sigh was heavy with disappointment. Tyler's real estate license was suspended for some kind of ethical violation. He was apparently pressuring elderly clients into transactions that weren't in their best interests, and someone filed a complaint with the state board. Bella's influence career never really took off the way she expected, and she's been spending money on clothes and equipment for photo shoots that don't generate enough income to justify the expenses. The picture Rosa painted was one of consistent poor judgment and financial irresponsibility across multiple family members. My parents had spent my college fund on a wedding they couldn't afford, then continued spending money they didn't have, to maintain appearances and lifestyle choices that exceeded their income. Bella and Tyler had built their life around expectations of success that weren't grounded in realistic planning or sustainable business practices. "They're asking me for $8,000, I told Rosa. "And what are you thinking about that request?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew what my answer should be. "I'm thinking that giving them money would be enabling the same kinds of decisions that created this problem in the first place," I replied. "I'm also thinking that they've never acknowledged the way they treated me when I needed their support." "You've become a wise young woman," Rosa said approvingly. "Your success didn't happen by accident. It happened because you learned to make difficult decisions and to prioritize long-term goals over short-term comfort. If you give them money without any accountability or changes in behavior, you'll just be postponing the next crisis." My conversation with Rosa clarified thoughts and feelings I had been struggling to articulate. The request for money wasn't just about financial assistance. It was about the fundamental relationship between responsibility and consequences. My family had made choices that led predictably to financial difficulties, and they were now asking me to shield them from the natural results of those choices. Meanwhile, my own life was reaching new heights of professional recognition and personal satisfaction. The presentation I had been preparing when my mother called was accepted for the International Conference on Machine Learning, making me one of the youngest presenters in the conference's history. The research I was conducting had attracted attention from major technology companies, and I had begun receiving informal inquiries about potential employment opportunities after graduation. Dr. Williams had also approached me about the possibility of pursuing graduate studies, suggesting that I could be accepted into any doctoral program in the country, and that several professors had expressed interest in having me join their research teams. These opportunities represented the culmination of years of focused effort and sacrifice, and they were opening doors to a future that exceeded even my most ambitious childhood dreams. The contrast between my trajectory and my family's situation became even more stark when I received a call from Bella herself, 2 weeks after my mother's initial request. She sounded tired and frustrated in a way that was completely different from the confident, bubbly personality she had always projected. "Emma, I know Mom already talked to you about our situation," she began without preamble. I wanted to call and explain things from my perspective. "I'm listening," I said, curious to hear how Bella would frame the family's financial crisis. "Tyler made some mistakes with his real estate business," she said, her voice taking on a defensive tone that suggested she had rehearsed this explanation. "He was trying to help elderly clients find properties that would be good investments, but some people misunderstood his intentions and filed complaints that weren't really fair." I made a non-committal sound, noting the way Bella was characterizing what Rosa had described as ethical violations, serious enough to result in license suspension. "And my influencer career has been harder than I expected," Bella continued. "The market is really saturated, and it takes time to build the kind of following that generates significant income. I've been investing in professional photography and high-quality content, but the returns haven't materialized as quickly as I had hoped." Again, I noticed the way Bella was framing spending money on investments and professional development, rather than acknowledging that her expenses had exceeded her income for an extended period. "The thing is," Bella said, her voice becoming more emotional, "we never expected to need help from family. We always planned to be independent and successful. But sometimes life doesn't go according to plan, and you need people who care about you to help you get back on your feet." "And you think I should be one of those people?" I asked. "You're my sister," Bella replied, as if that fact settled the matter entirely. "And you're doing so well in college. Mom says you're some kind of genius with computers, and that you're making good money from your research work. We're not asking you to support us permanently. We just need help getting through this difficult period." I found myself thinking about all the times Bella had dismissed my academic achievements as boring or irrelevant, all the family conversations where my successes had been overshadowed by discussions of her social media posts and dating adventures. Now that my boring computer skills had translated into financial stability and professional recognition, they suddenly seemed worthy of respect and exploitation. $8,000 is a significant amount of money, I said. "What assurances do I have that this would actually solve your problems rather than just postponing them?" "We've learned from our mistakes," Bella said quickly. "Tyler is working on getting his real estate license reinstated, and he's been more careful about following all the rules and regulations. I've been focusing on more sustainable approaches to content creation, building genuine engagement rather than just trying to gain followers quickly." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Bella alternating between explanations of how their situation had developed, promises about how they would avoid similar problems in the future, and emotional appeals based on family loyalty and shared history. Throughout the discussion, I noticed that she never once acknowledged the circumstances under which I had left home for college, never mentioned the college fund that had been spent on her wedding, and never seemed to recognize the irony of asking for financial help from the sister whose own dreams had been sacrificed for her benefit. After I hung up, I realized that the decision I was facing was about much more than money. It was about whether I would allow my family to continue treating me as a resource to be exploited when convenient, while ignoring my needs and accomplishments when they didn't serve their purposes. It was about whether I would enable their pattern of poor decision-making or insist that they face the consequences of their choices. The answer, when I finally articulated it to myself, was surprisingly clear. I had built my success by making difficult decisions, accepting responsibility for my choices, and working toward long-term goals even when the path was challenging. Those same principles needed to guide my response to my family's crisis. I called my mother the following Saturday morning, after I had finished my weekly research presentation and before I began preparing for the upcoming conference in Montreal. "I've been thinking about your request for financial help," I began, without preamble. "Oh, wonderful," my mother said, her voice immediately brightening. "We've been hoping you'd be able to help us through this difficult time." "I've decided that I won't be providing the money you've asked for," I said calmly. The silence that followed was so complete that I wondered if the call had been disconnected. Finally, my mother spoke, her voice tight with surprise and disappointment. "I don't understand," she said. "We're your family, Emma. We need your help." "You needed my help when I was trying to go to college," I replied. "But you decided that Bella's wedding was more important than my education. You made your priorities clear then, and I'm making mine clear now." "That's completely different," my mother protested. "We were trying to give Bella a good start in her marriage. We never intended to hurt you." "Intent doesn't matter as much as impact," I said. "The impact of your decision was that I had to build my future without any support from my family. I've learned to be self-reliant, and I think it's time for all of you to learn the same lesson." The conversation that followed was painful and difficult, filled with accusations, justifications, and emotional appeals that tested my resolve. My mother accused me of being heartless and vindictive. She suggested that I was punishing them for past mistakes rather than focusing on current needs. She reminded me of all the ways they had supported me during my childhood, conveniently omitting the ways they had failed to support me when it mattered most. I listened to her arguments with the same analytical mindset I brought to complex research. Problems, recognizing the logical fallacies and emotional manipulations embedded in her appeals. When she finished, I responded with the same calm directness that had served me well in academic and professional settings. "I'm not punishing you," I said. "I'm refusing to enable decisions and behaviors that have consistently led to problems. If you want to improve your financial situation, you need to address the underlying issues that created this crisis, not just find temporary solutions that allow you to avoid making necessary changes." By the time I hung up, I felt emotionally drained but intellectually satisfied. I had applied the same principles that had guided my academic and professional success to a personal situation that required difficult choices and long-term thinking. The decision felt right in a way that transcended the immediate discomfort of family conflict. 2 days later, I received a text message from Bella that was much less diplomatic than my mother's phone call. "I can't believe how selfish you've become," she wrote. "You used to be such a sweet girl, but success has made you cold and heartless. Don't expect us to be there for you when you need family support someday." I read her message while sitting in the university library, surrounded by graduate students and professors who valued intelligence, hard work, and intellectual integrity above social manipulation and emotional blackmail. The contrast between Bella's worldview and the environment I had chosen for myself couldn't have been more stark. I deleted her message without responding, then returned to the research paper I was writing about optimization algorithms for neural networks. The work was challenging and engaging in ways that reminded me why I had chosen this path and why the sacrifices had been worth making. That evening, I called Abuela Rosa to update her on my decision and its aftermath. "You did the right thing," she said firmly. "It wasn't easy, but it was right. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for people is refuse to rescue them from the consequences of their choices." "I feel sad about it," I admitted. "Part of me wishes I could have a different kind of relationship with my family." "The kind of relationship you have with people depends on the kind of people they choose to be," Rosa replied. "You can't control their choices, but you can control how you respond to them. You've chosen to respond with wisdom and strength." As I prepared for the conference in Montreal, where I would present my research to an international audience of experts in artificial intelligence and machine learning, I reflected on how much my life had changed since that day when I discovered my college fund had been spent on Bella's wedding. The girl who had felt powerless and forgotten had become a young woman who was making her mark in one of the most competitive fields in technology. But more than that, I had learned to trust my own judgment and to make decisions based on principles, rather than emotions or social pressure. The family crisis had tested those principles in ways that academic and professional challenges never could, and I had discovered that the strength I had developed through years of independent struggle was real and lasting. The future stretched ahead of me, full of opportunities that I would create through my own efforts and choices. I had learned that the most important approval I needed was my own, and that the most valuable support I could count on was the foundation I had built through years of hard work and principled decision-making. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning in March of my junior year, while I was reviewing code for a presentation I was scheduled to give at the international conference on machine learning in Montreal. I almost didn't answer when I saw my mother's number flashing on my screen, since our conversations had dwindled to brief holiday exchanges and occasional updates about family health issues that never seemed to require more than polite concern. "Emma, honey," my mother's voice sounded strained in a way I hadn't heard since the days when my father was between construction jobs. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." I glanced at my laptop screen, where lines of Python code represented months of work on neural network optimization that could revolutionize how artificial intelligence systems processed visual data. The presentation I was preparing could potentially attract the attention of major technology companies and establish my reputation in the field before I even graduated from college. "What's going on, Mom?" I asked, minimizing my code editor and giving her my attention despite the tight deadline I was facing. "Well, we've been having some difficulties lately," she began, her voice taking on the careful tone she had always used when approaching topics she found uncomfortable. "Your father's company lost a major contract, and they had to lay off several workers. He's been out of work for 3 months now." I set down my coffee cup and leaned back in my desk chair, processing this information. My father had worked for the same construction company for nearly 15 years, steadily climbing from entry-level laborer to project supervisor. The idea of him being unemployed was genuinely surprising, given his reputation for reliability and his extensive experience in commercial construction. The conversation that followed revealed the extent of my family's financial crisis. My parents were behind on mortgage payments, facing medical bills from my father's work injury, and struggling to support Bella and Tyler, who had moved back home after their own financial disasters. Tyler's real estate license had been suspended for ethical violations, and Bella's influencer career had never generated sustainable income. "We were wondering," my mother said, her voice becoming smaller and more hesitant, "if you might be able to help us out, just temporarily, until your father finds another position. We know you're doing well in college, and we thought maybe you could spare a little bit to help your family through this rough patch." $8,000. That's what they needed to avoid foreclosure and get current on their bills. The amount was significant but not impossible for me to manage, given the income I was earning from my research work and consulting projects. But the request felt surreal, coming from the same woman who had dismissed my college acceptance as a minor achievement and who had spent my entire college fund on my sister's wedding without a moment's hesitation. "What about Bella and Tyler?" I asked. "Are they able to help at all?" My mother's sigh was audible through the phone. "Bella and Tyler are having their own financial difficulties. Tyler's real estate business hasn't been going well, and Bella's influence work isn't bringing in as much money as they had hoped. They're actually living with us right now, trying to get back on their feet." The irony was profound. The same parents who had prioritized one daughter's wedding over the other daughter's education were now asking for financial assistance from the daughter they had abandoned. The same family members who had assumed I would fail without their support were now depending on my success to solve problems they had created through their own poor decisions. "I need some time to think about this," I told my mother. "This is a significant amount of money, and I need to consider how it would affect my own financial situation." "Of course, honey," my mother said, her voice brightening with what sounded like relief. "Take all the time you need. We're just so grateful that you're in a position to help us. We always knew you'd be successful." After I hung up, I sat in my apartment for a long time, staring at the research papers and technical journals scattered across my desk. The contrast between my current life and my family's situation was striking in ways that went far beyond financial circumstances. While I had been building a career based on innovation and intellectual achievement, They had been making the same kinds of short-sighted decisions that had led to my college fund being diverted to Bella's wedding. Over the next few days, I found myself distracted from my usual intense focus on research and coursework. The request for money had stirred up emotions and memories I had worked hard to process and move beyond. I thought about the teenager who had discovered her college fund had been spent without her knowledge or consent, and I wondered what she would think about being asked to bail out the same people who had betrayed her trust. I called Abuela Rosa to get her perspective on the family situation. She had remained my most trusted confidant throughout college, celebrating my achievements and offering wisdom when I faced difficult decisions. Her voice carried a mixture of concern and frustration when I told her about my mother's request for money. "They've been living beyond their means for years," she said bluntly. "Even before your father lost his job, they were struggling to keep up with their expenses. The wedding cost more than they could afford, and they've been trying to maintain the same lifestyle even though their income couldn't support it. They're asking me for $8,000, I told Rosa. "And what are you thinking about that request?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew what my answer should be. "I'm thinking that giving them money would be enabling the same kinds of decisions that created this problem in the first place," I replied. "I'm also thinking that they've never acknowledged the way they treated me when I needed their support." "You've become a wise young woman," Rosa said approvingly. "Your success didn't happen by accident. It happened because you learned to make difficult decisions and to prioritize long-term goals over short-term comfort. If you give them money without any accountability or changes in behavior, you'll just be postponing the next crisis." 2 weeks later, I received a call from Bella herself. Her voice sounded tired and frustrated in a way that was completely different from the confident, bubbly personality she had always projected. "Emma, I know Mom already talked to you about our situation," she began without preamble. "I wanted to call and explain things from my perspective." Bella's explanation was a masterclass in deflecting responsibility. Tyler's ethical violations became misunderstandings with clients who didn't appreciate his efforts to help them. Her failed influencer career was blamed on market saturation and algorithm changes that had nothing to do with her lack of consistent, quality content. "We're not asking you to support us permanently," Bella said, her voice becoming more emotional. "We just need help getting through this difficult period. You're my sister, and you're doing so well in college. Mom says you're some kind of genius with computers, and that you're making good money from your research work." I found myself thinking about all the times Bella had dismissed my academic achievements as boring or irrelevant. All the family conversations where my successes had been overshadowed by discussions of her social media posts and dating adventures. Now that my boring computer skills had translated into financial stability and professional recognition, they suddenly seemed worthy of respect and exploitation. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Bella alternating between explanations of how their situation had developed, promises about how they would avoid similar problems in the future, and emotional appeals based on family loyalty and shared history. Throughout the discussion, I noticed that she never once acknowledged the circumstances under which I had left home for college, never mentioned the college fund that had been spent on her wedding, and never seemed to recognize the irony of asking for financial help from the sister whose own dreams had been sacrificed for her benefit. After careful consideration and consultation with Abuela Rosa, I made my decision. I called my mother the following Saturday morning after I had finished my weekly research presentation and before I began preparing for the upcoming conference in Montreal. "I've been thinking about your request for financial help," I began without preamble. "Oh, wonderful," my mother said, her voice immediately brightening. "We've been hoping you'd be able to help us through this difficult time. I've decided that I won't be providing the money you've asked for," I said calmly. The silence that followed was so complete that I wondered if the call had been disconnected. Finally, my mother spoke, her voice tight with surprise and disappointment. "I don't understand," she said. "We're your family, Emma. We need your help." You needed my help when I was trying to go to college, I replied. But you decided that Bella's wedding was more important than my education. You made your priorities clear then, and I'm making mine clear now. The conversation that followed was painful and difficult, filled with accusations, justifications, and emotional appeals that tested my resolve. My mother accused me of being heartless and vindictive. She suggested that I was punishing them for past mistakes rather than focusing on current needs. She reminded me of all the ways they had supported me during my childhood, conveniently omitting the ways they had failed to support me when it mattered most. I listened to her arguments with the same analytical mindset I brought to complex research problems, recognizing the logical fallacies and emotional manipulations embedded in her appeals. When she finished, I responded with the same calm directness that had served me well in academic and professional settings. I'm not punishing you, I said. I'm refusing to enable decisions and behaviors that have consistently led to problems. If you want to improve your financial situation, you need to address the underlying issues that created this crisis, not just find temporary solutions that allow you to avoid making necessary changes. By the time I hung up, I felt emotionally drained but intellectually satisfied. I had applied the same principles that had guided my academic and professional success to a personal situation that required difficult choices and long-term thinking. 2 days later, I received a text message from Bella that was much less diplomatic than my mother's phone call. I can't believe how selfish you've become, she wrote. You used to be such a sweet girl, but success has made you cold and heartless. Don't expect us to be there for you when you need family support someday. I deleted her message without responding, then returned to the research paper I was writing about optimization algorithms for neural networks. The work was challenging and engaging in ways that reminded me why I had chosen this path and why the sacrifices had been worth making. Meanwhile, my own life was reaching new heights of professional recognition and personal satisfaction. The presentation I had been preparing when my mother called was accepted for the International Conference on Machine Learning, making me one of the youngest presenters in the conference's history. The research I was conducting had attracted attention from major technology companies, and I had begun receiving informal inquiries about potential employment opportunities after graduation. 6 months later, the email that would change everything arrived on a Thursday morning in April of my senior year. Rebecca Martinez, a journalist from the San Diego Tribune, was preparing a feature story about exceptional students at local universities, focusing on those who had overcome significant obstacles to achieve academic and professional success. Your professors have described your work in artificial intelligence as groundbreaking for an undergraduate student, Martinez had written. We understand that you've also secured a position with a major technology company upon graduation, with what our sources describe as an exceptionally competitive starting salary. We'd love to feature your story as an inspiration for other students who may be facing similar challenges. The job offer she referenced had come through 3 months earlier, following a series of interviews that had tested every aspect of my technical knowledge and problem-solving abilities. Microsoft had extended an offer for a software engineering position in Seattle with a starting salary of $150,000, plus stock options and a signing bonus. The Microsoft recruiter who had extended the offer had mentioned that my combination of academic achievement and practical research experience was unusual among recent graduates. I agreed to the interview, scheduling it for the following week at a coffee shop near campus. Rebecca Martinez turned out to be a woman in her 40s with the kind of direct, intelligent manner that immediately put me at ease. She had done her research thoroughly, asking informed questions about my work in machine learning and the specific algorithms I had developed for medical imaging analysis. The interview continued for nearly 2 hours, covering everything from my specific research, contributions to my plans for the future. Martinez was particularly interested in my perspective on the challenges facing first-generation college students and the importance of mentorship in helping young people navigate unfamiliar academic and professional environments. When she asked, About my long-term goals, I found myself articulating ambitions that I had been developing throughout my senior year, but had never fully expressed before. I talked about my interest in using artificial intelligence to solve problems in healthcare and education, about the possibility of eventually starting my own company focused on developing technology that could improve people's lives in meaningful ways. The article was published 3 weeks later, on a Sunday morning when I was preparing for my final presentations before graduation. The headline read, "Local Student Overcomes Financial Hardship to Land Dream Job at Microsoft," and it featured a photograph of me in the computer science lab, surrounded by the equipment I had used for my senior capstone project. The story was comprehensive and thoughtful, weaving together details about my academic achievements, my research contributions, and my plans for the future. Martinez had interviewed several of my professors, who had provided quotes about my intellectual capabilities and work ethic that were both flattering and professionally valuable. The article also included details about my employment offer that made clear just how exceptional it was for a recent graduate. The starting salary, the stock options, the signing bonus, and the rapid career advancement opportunities that Microsoft had outlined during the recruitment process were all described in specific terms that demonstrated the significance of my achievement. The first call came that same Sunday afternoon. My mother's number appeared on my phone screen, and I hesitated before answering, knowing that this conversation would be unlike any we had shared in the past 2 years. "Emma," my mother said, her voice carrying a tone I couldn't quite identify. "We saw the article in the Tribune. We had no idea about your job offer or your achievements at school." $150,000, my mother continued, as if she hadn't heard my response. "Plus, stock options and bonuses. Emma, that's more money than your father and I make combined, even when he was working full-time." I waited for her to continue, curious about where this conversation was heading. The tone in her voice suggested something more complex than simple congratulations, though I couldn't yet identify what emotional undercurrents were driving her words. "We're so proud of you," she said, though the words sounded rehearsed rather than spontaneous. "We always knew you were smart, but we never imagined you would achieve something like this." "The thing is," my mother continued, her voice shifting to a more familiar pattern, "we've been thinking about what this means for our family. You're going to be making so much money, and we're still struggling with the same financial problems we discussed a few months ago. I was thinking," she continued, "that maybe we could revisit the conversation we had about you helping the family through this difficult period. Now that we know how well you're doing, it seems like $8,000 wouldn't be such a burden for you after all." The audacity of the request left me momentarily speechless. My mother had read a newspaper article celebrating my academic achievements and professional success, and her immediate response had been to calculate how those accomplishments could be leveraged to solve problems that she and my father had created through their own poor financial decisions. "Mom," I said slowly, "my success doesn't change the fundamental issues we discussed before. You and Dad made choices that led to your current financial situation, and providing money to temporarily solve those problems wouldn't address the underlying behaviors that created them." "But you're going to be rich," my mother protested. "You're going to have more money than you could possibly need, while your own family is struggling to keep their home. How can you sleep at night knowing that we're suffering when you could easily help us?" The conversation continued in this vein for 20 more minutes, with my mother alternating between emotional appeals, guilt-based manipulation, and increasingly direct demands for financial assistance. She mentioned my father's pride in my achievements, Bella's amazement at my success, and the family's collective hope that my good fortune would translate into relief for their ongoing struggles. I ended the call by promising to think about her request, though I had already made my decision. The conversation had reminded me of all the reasons I had needed to build an independent life, and it had reinforced my conviction that maintaining boundaries with my family was essential to preserving the success I had worked so hard to achieve. Bella called 2 days later with a more sophisticated approach, framing financial assistance as an investment rather than charity. But the underlying expectation remained the same. Tyler called the following week with an elaborate scheme involving real estate investments that would supposedly benefit both of us, but was clearly designed primarily to provide him with capital for his career rehabilitation. Each conversation followed the same pattern. My family members had read about my success in the newspaper, calculated how it could benefit them financially, and developed strategies for persuading me to provide assistance. None of them acknowledged the circumstances under which I had left home for college. None mentioned the college fund that had been spent on Bella's wedding. And none seemed to recognize the contradiction between their current appeals to family, loyalty, and their past prioritization of one daughter over another. 3 months after graduation, I moved to Seattle to begin my new life as a software engineer at Microsoft. The transition was both exciting and overwhelming, involving not just a change of geography, but a complete transformation of my daily routine, social environment, and professional expectations. The company provided relocation assistance that covered my moving expenses and temporary housing, but I was still responsible for finding a permanent apartment, establishing myself in a new city, and beginning a job that would challenge me in ways that my academic work had only begun to prepare me for. My first apartment was a modest one-bedroom unit in Capitol Hill, a neighborhood known for its vibrant art scene and diverse population. The rent was higher than anything I had paid as a student, but the Microsoft salary made it easily affordable, and I found myself in the unfamiliar position of being able to make housing decisions based on preferences rather than financial constraints. The work at Microsoft was intellectually demanding in ways that reminded me of my most challenging research projects at UC San Diego, but with the added pressure of corporate expectations and deadlines that were driven by product development cycles rather than academic schedules. I was assigned to a team working on machine learning applications for cloud computing, and my colleagues were some of the most brilliant people I had ever encountered. My first few months in Seattle were a period of intense learning and adjustment. I was absorbing new technical knowledge at a rapid pace, adapting to corporate culture and team dynamics, and establishing myself as a reliable contributor to projects that affected millions of users worldwide. The work was exactly the kind of challenge I had been preparing for throughout my college career. Meanwhile, my family's financial situation continued to deteriorate. I learned about their ongoing struggles through occasional calls from Abuela, Rosa, who remained in touch with my parents despite her disapproval of their financial management and their treatment of me. Rosa's updates painted a picture of increasing desperation, with my father still unable to find steady employment and my parents facing the possibility of foreclosure on their house. 6 months into my Microsoft career, I received a call from my father that was unlike any conversation we had ever shared. His voice was subdued and defeated in a way that I had never heard before, stripped of the defensive pride that had characterized most of our interactions about money and family responsibilities. "Emma," he said, "I need to tell you something, and I'm not sure how to say it without sounding like I'm begging. We're going to lose the house. The bank has started foreclosure proceedings, and we don't have the money to bring the mortgage current. We've tried everything we can think of, but we're out of options." The news was shocking despite my awareness of their financial difficulties. The house on Maple Street had been my childhood home, the place where I had spent countless hours, studying and dreaming about my future. The idea of my parents losing it felt significant in ways that went beyond their immediate housing needs. "I know we haven't been the best parents to you," he said finally, his voice heavy with emotion that sounded genuine rather than manipulative. "I know we made mistakes with your college money, and I know we didn't support you the way we should have when you were trying to build your future. But we're desperate, Emma. We don't know what else to do." This was the closest thing to an apology I had ever received from my father, and it carried more emotional weight than any of the previous requests for money. He wasn't trying to justify their past decisions or minimize their impact on my life. He was acknowledging that they had failed me as parents, while simultaneously asking for help during their own crisis. "Dad," I said carefully, "I understand that you're facing a difficult situation, and I'm genuinely sorry that things have reached this point. But I need you to understand that helping you financially wouldn't actually solve the underlying problems that created this crisis." "You're right," he said finally. "We've been making poor decisions for years, and we've been expecting other people to bail us out when those decisions created problems. But Emma, we're old, and we're scared, and we don't know how to start over at our age." The vulnerability in his voice was unlike anything I had heard from him before, and it touched something in me that had been protected by years of emotional distance and self-reliance. I found myself wanting to help him, not because I owed him anything, but because he was finally speaking to me with honesty rather than manipulation. "I might be willing to help with a security deposit for an apartment," I said slowly. "But only if you and Mom are willing to work with a financial counselor to develop a realistic budget and spending plan. And only if you understand that this would be a one-time assistance, not the beginning of ongoing financial support." Over the next few weeks, my parents worked with a nonprofit credit counseling service to analyze their financial situation and develop a plan for managing their expenses within their available income. The process revealed the extent to which their spending had exceeded their means for years, and it required them to make difficult choices about lifestyle changes and priorities. They found a modest 2-bedroom apartment in a less expensive neighborhood, and I provided the security deposit and first month's rent as I had promised. The total amount was $3,000, significantly less than the $8,000 they had originally requested. But it was enough to give them stable housing, while they continued working on their financial recovery. The experience of helping my parents in a limited, structured way taught me something important about the difference between enabling and supporting. By providing assistance that was tied to specific conditions and behavioral changes, I was able to help them address their immediate crisis without rewarding the decision-making patterns that had created the problem. My relationship with my parents improved gradually after this experience, though it remained fundamentally different from what it had been during my childhood. They seemed to have gained a new respect for my judgment and my boundaries, and they stopped making requests for additional financial assistance. Our conversations became more genuine and less transactional, focused on sharing news about our respective lives rather than on calculations about what I might be willing to provide. My career at Microsoft continued to flourish, with my contributions to machine learning projects earning recognition from senior engineers and managers who began involving me in increasingly complex and high-profile work. I was promoted twice during my first 2 years with the company, and my salary increased substantially beyond the already generous starting offer that had attracted so much attention from my family. But more than the financial rewards, I found satisfaction in work that felt meaningful and challenging. I was contributing to technological innovations that could improve people's lives in concrete ways, and I was surrounded by colleagues who shared my passion for solving complex problems through creativity and analytical thinking. 3 years. After graduating from college, I received an email that brought my story full circle in a way I hadn't expected. Rebecca Martinez, the journalist who had written the original newspaper article about my achievements, was working on a follow-up story about how the students she had profiled were progressing in their careers and personal lives. "Your story resonated with many readers," she wrote, "and I've received several inquiries about whether you've remained in touch with your family and how your success has affected those relationships. Would you be willing to discuss how your life has evolved since graduation?" I agreed to another interview, curious about what perspectives I had gained during my first few years of professional life. Martinez and I met at a coffee shop in downtown Seattle, and she asked thoughtful questions about my career development, my relationship with my family, and my thoughts about the themes that had defined my original story. "When I first interviewed you," she said, "you were focused primarily on proving that you could succeed independently. Now that you've established yourself professionally, how has your perspective changed? I think I've learned that success isn't just about individual achievement, I replied. It's also about using your capabilities and resources in ways that create positive impact for other people. But the key is making sure that your help actually helps, rather than just enabling problems to continue. I told her about my experience helping my parents with their housing crisis, and about the lessons I had learned about the difference between supporting people and enabling destructive patterns. I also talked about my work at Microsoft, and about how I was beginning to think about longer-term goals that went beyond personal financial success. I'm starting to consider what it would mean to start my own company, I said. There are problems in education and healthcare that I think could be addressed through artificial intelligence applications, and I'm reaching a point in my career where I have the experience and resources to pursue more entrepreneurial goals. The follow-up article was published 6 months later, with a focus on how my career had developed and how my perspective on success and family relationships had evolved. The story generated less attention than the original article, but it attracted interest from several venture capital firms and technology entrepreneurs who were working on similar problems in education and workforce development. One of these contacts led to a conversation that would eventually change the trajectory of my career. Dr. Amanda Chen, a former Microsoft executive who had started her own education technology company, reached out to discuss potential collaboration on artificial intelligence applications for personalized learning. "I've been following your work at Microsoft," she said during our initial phone conversation, "and I'm impressed by your technical capabilities and your perspective on educational access. I think there might be opportunities for us to work together on problems that align with both of our interests." Dr. Chen's company was developing software that could adapt to individual students' learning styles and pace, providing personalized instruction that was more effective than traditional classroom approaches. The work was exactly the kind of meaningful application of technology that I had been hoping to pursue, and it reminded me of my original motivation for studying computer science. The consulting relationship eventually led to a full-time job offer that would allow me to leave Microsoft and join Dr. Chen's company as a co-founder and chief technology officer. The position would involve a significant reduction in salary compared to my Microsoft compensation, but it would also provide equity in a company that could potentially create substantial value while addressing problems I cared about deeply. The decision to leave Microsoft was difficult, involving careful consideration of financial implications, career risks, and personal goals. I had established myself successfully in a prestigious position at a stable company, and leaving that security to join a startup represented a significant gamble on my own capabilities and judgment. But I had learned to trust my instincts about opportunities that aligned with my values and interests, and the education technology startup felt like a natural evolution of my career and my personal mission. I decided to accept Dr. Chen's offer, beginning a new phase of my professional life that would be focused on using artificial intelligence to expand educational opportunities for students facing the kinds of barriers I had encountered. Working with Dr. Chen and a small team of engineers and educators, I helped develop software that could identify students' learning patterns and provide personalized instruction that adapted to their individual needs and circumstances. Our first product was designed for community colleges and public universities, focusing on students who were at risk of dropping out due to academic or financial challenges. Within 2 years, our company had secured contracts with dozens of educational institutions, and our software was being used by thousands of students across the country. The impact was measurable and meaningful, with graduation rates improving significantly at schools that implemented our technology, compared to control groups that used traditional academic support services. 5 years after leaving Microsoft, our education technology company was acquired by a larger educational publisher for a sum that made my equity stake worth several $1,000,000. The acquisition provided financial security that exceeded even my most optimistic projections from my college graduation, but it also marked the end of the startup phase of my career and the beginning of new decisions about how to use my resources and experience. The acquisition coincided with a personal milestone that brought my journey full circle in unexpected ways. I was invited to deliver the commencement address at UC San Diego, speaking to a graduating class that included many students who had used our educational software during their college careers. Standing at the podium where I had received my own diploma 8 years earlier, I looked out at an audience that included my former professors, current students, and family members who had traveled to San Diego to hear me speak. Abuela Rosa was in the front row, beaming with pride and taking photographs with the same enthusiasm she had shown at my own graduation. My parents were also in attendance, looking older but more settled than they had during the difficult years, following my father's unemployment. They had gradually rebuilt their financial stability through careful budgeting and steady work, and their relationship with me had evolved into something that resembled mutual respect and genuine affection. My commencement address focused on the themes that had defined my own educational journey: the importance of persistence in the face of obstacles, the value of mentorship and institutional support, and the responsibility that comes with educational and professional success. Success is not just about individual achievement, I told the graduating class. It's about using your capabilities and resources to create opportunities for other people to succeed. The education you've received here is not just a personal accomplishment, but a foundation that you can use to build a better world for everyone. After the ceremony, I was approached by several students who had used our educational software and who credited it with helping them stay in school during difficult periods. Their stories reminded me of my own struggles with financial constraints and academic uncertainty, and they reinforced my conviction that technology could be used to address systemic barriers that prevent capable people from reaching their full potential. As I reflected on my journey from the forgotten daughter in Riverside to a successful entrepreneur speaking at my alma mater's commencement ceremony, I realized that the most important transformation had not been financial or professional, but personal. I had learned to value myself independent of other people's recognition or approval, and I had developed the confidence to make decisions based on my own principles and priorities rather than on external expectations or pressures. The girl who had felt invisible in her own family had become a woman who was making her mark in the world through work that aligned with her values and capabilities. But more than that, I had learned to create the kind of family and community relationships that were based on mutual respect and genuine affection rather than calculation and manipulation. My story had begun with betrayal and disappointment, but it had evolved into one of transformation and purpose. The college fund that my parents had spent on Bella's wedding had forced me to become independent and self-reliant in ways that ultimately made me stronger and more successful than I might have been with traditional family support. The challenges I had faced as a student had given me insights into barriers that prevent other capable people from reaching their potential, and those insights had shaped my career toward work that could create meaningful change in the world. The family conflicts that had been so painful during my college years had taught me to establish healthy boundaries and to make decisions based on principles rather than emotions or social pressure. Standing on the UC San Diego campus, where I had first discovered my potential and proven my capabilities, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought me to this point. The path had been difficult and uncertain, but it had led to a life that was more fulfilling and impactful than anything I could have imagined when I first arrived on campus with everything I owned packed into 2 suitcases. My name is Emma Rodriguez, and this is the story of how betrayal became the foundation for transformation, how independence became the source of strength, and how success became the platform for service. The girl who was once forgotten had become a woman who would never forget the importance of helping others find their own path to success and fulfillment. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.